Peru, officially the Republic of Peru, is a country in western South America. It is bordered in the north by Ecuador and Colombia, in the east by Brazil, in the southeast by Bolivia, in the south by Chile, and in the west by the Pacific Ocean. Peru is an extremely biodiverse country with habitats ranging from the arid plains of the Pacific coastal region in the west to the peaks of the Andes Mountains vertically extending from the north to the southeast of the country to the tropical Amazon basin rainforest in the east with the Amazon River. Peruvian territory was home to ancient cultures spanning from the Norte Chico civilization in Carol, one of the oldest in the world, to the Inca Empire, the largest state in pre-Columbian America. The Spanish Empire conquered the region in the 16th century and established a viceroyalty with its capital in Lima, which included most of its South American colonies. Ideas of political autonomy later spread throughout Spanish America, and Peru gained its independence, which was formally proclaimed in 1821. After the Battle of Ayacucho, 3 years after proclamation, Peru ensured its independence. After achieving independence, the country remained in recession and kept a low military profile until an economic rise based on the extraction of raw and maritime materials struck the country, which ended shortly before the War of the Pacific. Subsequently, the country has undergone changes in government from oligarchic to democratic systems. Peru has gone through periods of political unrest and internal conflict as well as periods of stability and economic upswing. Peru is a representative democratic republic divided into 25 regions. It is a developing country with a high Human Development Index score and a poverty level around 25.8%. Its main economic activities include mining, manufacturing, agriculture and fishing. The Peruvian population, estimated at 31.2 million in 2015, is multi-ethnic, including Amerindians, Europeans, Africans and Asians. The main spoken language is Spanish, although a significant number of Peruvians speak Quechua or other native languages. This mixture of cultural traditions has resulted in a wide diversity of expressions in fields such as art, cuisine, literature, and music. Etymology. The name of the country may be derived from Peru, the name of a local ruler who lived near the Bay of San Miguel, Panama, in the early 16th century. When his possessions were visited by Spanish explorers in 1522, they were the southernmost part of the New World yet known to Europeans. Thus, when Francisco Pizarro explored the regions farther south, they came to be designated Peru. An alternative history is provided by the contemporary writer Inca Garcilasco de la Vega, son of an Inca princess and a conquistador. He said the name Peru was that of a common Indian happened upon by the crew of a ship on an exploratory mission for Governor Pedro Arias de Avila, and went on to relate more instances of misunderstandings due to the lack of a common language. The Spanish crown gave the name legal status with the 1529 Capitulation de Toledo, which designated the newly encountered Inca Empire as the province of Peru. Under Spanish rule, the country adopted the denomination Viceroyalty of Peru, which became Republic of Peru after independence. History. Prehistory and pre-Columbian period. The earliest evidences of human presence in Peruvian territory have been dated to approximately 9000 BC. Andean societies were based on agriculture, using techniques such as irrigation and terracing. Camelid husbandry and fishing were also important. Organization relied on reciprocity and redistribution because these societies had no notion of market or money. The oldest known complex society in Peru, the Norte Chico civilization, flourished along the coast of the Pacific Ocean between 3000 1000 and 1800 BC. These early developments were followed by archaeological cultures that developed in mostly around the coastal and Andean regions throughout Peru. The Cupasni culture, which flourished from around 1000 to 200 BC along what is now Peru's Pacific coast, was an example of early pre-Incan culture. The Chavan culture that developed from 1500 to 300 BC was probably more of a religious than a political phenomenon, with the religious center in Chavandawanta. After the decline of the Chavan culture around the beginning of the Christian millennium, a series of localized and specialized cultures rose and fell, both on the coast and in the highlands, during the next 1,000 years. On the coast, these included the civilizations of the Paracas, Nazca, Wari, and the more outstanding Chimu and Mochica. The Mochica, who reached their apogee in the first millennium AD, were renowned for their irrigation system which fertilized their arid terrain. The sophisticated ceramic pottery, the lofty buildings, and clever metalwork. The Chimu were the great city builders of pre-Inca civilization, as loose confederation of cities scattered along the coast of northern Peru and southern Ecuador. The Chimu flourished from about 1150 to 1450. Their capital was at Chanchan outside of modern-day Trujillo. In the highlands, both the Tiahuanaco culture near Lake Titicaca in both Peru and Bolivia, and the Wari culture near the present-day city of Ayacucho, developed large urban settlements and wide-ranging state systems between 500 and 1000 AD. In the 15th century, the Incas emerged as a powerful state which, in the span of a century, formed the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, with the capital in Cusco. The Incas of Cusco originally represented one of the small and relatively minor ethnic groups, the Quechuas. Gradually, as early as the 13th century, they began to expand and incorporate the neighbors. Inca expansion was slow until about the middle of the 15th century, when the pace of conquest began to accelerate, particularly under the rule of the great emperor Pachacuta. Under his rule and that of his son, Topa Inca Yupanqui, the Incas came to control most of the Andean region, with a population of 9 to 16 million inhabitants under the rule. Pachacuta also promulgated a comprehensive code of laws to govern his far-flung empire, while consolidating his absolute temporal and spiritual authority as the god of the sun who ruled from a magnificently rebuilt Cusco. From 1438 to 1533, the Incas used a variety of methods, from conquest to peaceful assimilation, to incorporate a large portion of West and South America, centered on the Andean mountain ranges, from southern Colombia to Chile, between the Pacific Ocean in the west and the Amazon rainforest in the east. The official language of the empire was Quechua, although hundreds of local languages and dialects were spoken. The Inca referred to their empire as Tawantinsuyu, which can be translated as the four regions or the four united provinces. Many local forms of worship persisted in the empire, most of them concerning local sacred Huacas. But the Inca leadership encouraged the worship of Inti, the sun god, and imposed its sovereignty above other cults such as that of Pachamama. The Incas considered the king, the Sapa Inca, to be the child of the sun. Conquest and colonial period. Atahualpa, the last Sapa Inca, became emperor when he defeated and executed his older half-brother Huascar in a civil war sparked by the death of their father, Inca Huayna Capac. In December 1532, a party of conquistadors led by Francisco Pizarro defeated and captured the Inca emperor Atahualpa in the Battle of Cajamarca. The Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire was one of the most important campaigns in the Spanish colonization of the Americas. After years of preliminary exploration and military conflicts, it was the first step in a long campaign that took decades of fighting but ended in Spanish victory and colonization of the region known as the Viceroyalty of Peru, with its capital at Lima, which became known as the City of Kings. The conquest of the Inca Empire led to spin-off campaigns throughout the Viceroyalty, as well as expeditions towards the Amazon basin, as in the case of Spanish efforts to quell Amerindian resistance. The last Inca resistance was suppressed when the Spaniards annihilated the Neo-Inca state in Vilcabamba in 1572. The indigenous population dramatically collapsed, principally due to epidemic diseases introduced by the Spanish. Exploitation and socio-economic change also contributed to the collapse. Viceroy Francisco de Toledo reorganized the country in the 1570s with gold and silver mining as its main economic activity and Amerindian force labor as its primary workforce. With the discovery of the great silver and gold lodes at Potosi and Huancavelica, the Viceroyalty flourished as an important provider of mineral resources. Peruvian bullion provided revenue for the Spanish crown and fueled a complex trade network that extended as far as Europe and the Philippines. Because of lack of available workforce, African slaves were added to the labor population. The expansion of a colonial administrative apparatus and bureaucracy paralleled the economic reorganization. With the conquest started the spread of Christianity in South America. Most people were forcefully converted to Catholicism, taking only a generation to convert the population. They built churches in every city and replaced some of the Inca temples with churches, such as the Coricancha in the city of Cusco. The church employed the Inquisition, making use of torture to ensure that newly converted Catholics did not stray to other religions or beliefs. Peruvian Catholicism follows the syncretism found in many Latin American countries, in which religious native rituals have been integrated with Christian celebrations. In this endeavor, the Church came to play an important role in the acculturation of the natives, drawing them into the cultural orbit of the Spanish settlers. By the 18th century, declining silver production and economic diversification greatly diminished royal income. In response, the Crown enacted the Bourbon Reforms, a series of edicts that increased taxes and partitioned the Viceroyalty. The new laws provoked Tupac Amaru's rebellion and other revolts, all of which were suppressed. As a result of these and other changes, the Spaniards and the Creole successors came to monopolize control over the land, seizing many of the best lands abandoned by the massive native depopulation. However, the Spanish did not resist the Portuguese expansion of Brazil across the meridian. The Treaty of Tordesillas was rendered meaningless between 1580 and 1640 while Spain controlled Portugal. The need to ease communication and trade with Spain led to the split of the Viceroyalty and the creation of new Viceroyalties of New Granada and Rio de la Plata at the expense of the territories that formed the Viceroyalty of Peru. This reduced the power, prominence and importance of Lima as the viceroyal capital and shifted the lucrative Andean trade to Buenos Aires and Bogotá, while the fall of the mining and textile production accelerated the progressive decay of the Viceroyalty of Peru. Eventually, the Viceroyalty would dissolve, as with much of the Spanish Empire, when challenged by national independence movements at the beginning of the 19th century. These movements led to the formation of the majority of modern-day countries of South America in the territories that at one point or another had constituted the Viceroyalty of Peru. The conquest and colony brought a mix of cultures and ethnicities that did not exist before the Spanish conquered the Peruvian territory. Even though many of the Inca traditions were lost or diluted, new customs, traditions and knowledge were added, creating a rich mixed Peruvian culture. Independence in the early 19th century. While most of South America was swept by wars of independence, Peru remained a royalist stronghold, as the elite vacillated between emancipation and loyalty to the Spanish monarchy. Independence was achieved only after the occupation by military campaigns of José de San Martin and Simón Bolívar. The economic crisis, the loss of power of Spain in Europe, the War of Independence in North America and native uprisings all contributed to a favorable climate to the development of emancipating ideas among the Criollo population in South America. However, the Criollo oligarchy in Peru enjoyed privileges and remained loyal to the Spanish crown. The liberation movement started in Argentina, where autonomous juntas were created as a result of the loss of authority of the Spanish government over its colonies. After fighting for the independence of the Viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata, José de San Martin created the Army of the Andes and crossed the Andes in 21 days, a great accomplishment in military history. Once in Chile, he joined forces with Chilean Army General Bernardo O'Higgins and liberated the country in the battles of Chacabuco and Maipu in 1818. On the 7th of September 1820, a fleet of 8 warships arrived in the port of Paracas under the command of General José de San Martin and Thomas Cochrane, who was serving in the Chilean Navy. Immediately on the 26th of October they took control of the town of Pisco. San Martin settled in Huacho on the 12th of November, where he established his headquarters while Cochrane sailed north blockading the port of Callao in Lima. At the same time in the north, Guayaquil was occupied by rebel forces under the command of Gregorio Escobedo. Because Peru was the stronghold of the Spanish government in South America, San Martin's strategy to liberate Peru was to use diplomacy. He sent representatives to Lima urging the viceroy that Peru be granted independence. However, all negotiations proved unsuccessful. The viceroy of Peru, Joaquín de la Pazuela, named José de la Serna commander-in-chief of the Loyalist army to protect Lima from the threatened invasion of San Martin. On the 29th of January, de la Serna organized a coup against de la Pazuela, which was recognized by Spain, and he was named Viceroy of Peru. This internal power struggle contributed to the success of the liberating army. In order to avoid a military confrontation, San Martin met the newly appointed Viceroy, José de la Serna, and proposed to create a constitutional monarchy, a proposal that was turned down. De la Serna abandoned the city, and on the 12th of July 1821 San Martin occupied Lima and declared Peruvian independence on the 28th of July 1821. He created the first Peruvian flag. Alto Peru remained as a Spanish stronghold until the army of Simón Bolívar liberated it 3 years later. José de San Martin was declared protector of Peru. Peruvian national identity was forged during this period, as Bolivarian projects for a Latin American confederation floundered and a union with Bolivia proved ephemeral. Simón Bolívar launched his campaign from the north, liberating the Viceroyalty of New Granada in the battles of Carabobo in 1821 and Pichincha a year later. In July 1822 Bolívar and San Martin gathered in the Guayaquil Conference. Bolívar was left in charge of fully liberating Peru while San Martin retired from politics after the first parliament was assembled. The newly founded Peruvian Congress named Bolívar dictator of Peru, giving him the power to organize the military. With the help of Antonio José de Sucre, they defeated the largest Spanish army in the Battle of Junín on 6 August 1824 and the decisive Battle of Ayacucho on 9 December of the same year, consolidating the independence of Peru and Alto Peru. Alto Peru was later established as Bolivia. During the early years of the Republic, endemic struggles for power between military leaders caused political instability. 19th century to present. From the 1840s to the 1860s, Peru enjoyed a period of stability under the presidency of Ramon Castilla, through increased state revenues from guano exports. However, by the 1870s, these resources had been depleted, the country was heavily indebted, and political infighting was again on the rise. Peru embarked on a railroad building program that helped but also bankrupted the country. In 1879, Peru entered the War of the Pacific, which lasted until 1884. Bolivia invoked its alliance with Peru against Chile. The Peruvian government tried to mediate the dispute by sending a diplomatic team to negotiate with the Chilean government, but the committee concluded that war was inevitable. Chile declared war on 5 April 1879. Almost 5 years of war ended with the loss of the Department of Tarapacá and the provinces of Tacna and Arica. In the Atacama region, two outstanding military leaders throughout the war were Francisco Bolognesi and Miguel Grau. Originally, Chile committed to a referendum for the cities of Arica and Tacna to be held years later, in order to self-determine the national affiliation. However, Chile refused to apply the treaty, and neither of the countries could determine the statutory framework. After the War of the Pacific, an extraordinary effort of rebuilding began. The government started to initiate a number of social and economic reforms in order to recover from the damage of the war. Political stability was achieved only in the early 1900s. Internal struggles after the war were followed by a period of stability under the Civilista Party, which lasted until the onset of the authoritarian regime of Augusto B. Leguía. The Great Depression caused the downfall of Leguía, renewed political turmoil, and the emergence of the American Popular Revolutionary Alliance. The rivalry between this organization and a coalition of the elite and the military defined Peruvian politics for the following 3 decades. A final peace treaty in 1929, signed between Peru and Chile called the Treaty of Lima, returned Tacna to Peru. Between 1932 and 1933, Peru was engulfed in a year-long war with Colombia over a territorial dispute involving the Amazonas Department and its capital Leticia. Later, in 1941, Peru became involved in the Ecuadorian-Peruvian War, after which the Rio Protocol sought to formalize the boundary between those two countries. In a military coup on 29 October 1948, Gen. Manuel A. Odría became president. Odría's presidency was known as the Oceanio, momentarily pleasing the oligarchy and all others on the right, but followed a populist course that won him great favor with the poor and lower classes. A thriving economy allowed him to indulge in expensive but crowd-pleasing social policies. At the same time, however, civil rights were severely restricted and corruption was rampant throughout his regime. Odría was succeeded by Manuel Prado Ugarte. However, widespread allegations of fraud prompted the Peruvian military to depose Prado and install a military junta, led by Ricardo Pérez Godoy. Godoy ran a short transitional government and held new elections in 1963, which were won by Fernando Belaúnde Terry, who assumed presidency until 1968. Belaúnde was recognized for his commitment to the democratic process. In 1968, the armed forces led by General Juan Velasco Alvarado staged a coup against Belaúnde. Alvarado's regime undertook radical reforms aimed at fostering development, but failed to gain widespread support. In 1975, General Francisco Morales Bermudez forcefully replaced Velasco, paralyzed reforms, and oversaw the re-establishment of democracy. Peru engaged in a brief successful conflict with Ecuador in the Paquisha War as a result of territorial dispute between the two countries. After the country experienced chronic inflation, the Peruvian currency, the sol, was replaced by the Inti in mid-1985, which itself was replaced by the Nuevo Sol in July 1991, at which time the new sol had a cumulative value of 1 billion old sols. The per capita annual income of Peruvians fell to $720 and Peru's GDP dropped 20%, at which national reserves were a negative $900 million. The economic turbulence of the time exacerbated social tensions in Peru and partly contributed to the rise of violent rebel rural insurgent movements, like Sendero Luminoso and MRTA, which caused great havoc throughout the country. Concerned about the economy, the increasing terrorist threat from Sendero Luminoso and MRTA, and allegations of official corruption, Alberto Fujimori assumed presidency in 1990. Fujimori implemented drastic measures that caused inflation to drop from 7,650% in 1990 to 139% in 1991. Faced with opposition to his reform efforts, Fujimori dissolved Congress in the auto-golpe of 5 April 1992. He then revised the constitution, called new congressional elections, and implemented substantial economic reform, including privatization of numerous state-owned companies, creation of an investment-friendly climate, and sound management of the economy. Fujimori's administration was dogged by insurgent groups, most notably the Sendero Luminoso, who carried out terrorist campaigns across the country throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Fujimori cracked down on the insurgents and was successful in largely quelling them by the late 1990s, but the fight was marred by atrocities committed by both the Peruvian security forces and the insurgents. The Barrios Altos massacre and Lo Cantuta massacre by government paramilitary groups, and the bombings of Tarata and Frecuencia Latina by Sendero Luminoso. Those incidents subsequently came to symbolize the human rights violations committed in the last years of violence. During early 1995, once again Peru and Ecuador clashed in the Senapur War, but in 1998 the governments of both nations signed a peace treaty that clearly demarcated the international boundary between them. In November 2000, Fujimori resigned from office and went into a self-imposed exile, avoiding prosecution for human rights violations and corruption charges by the new Peruvian authorities. Since the end of the Fujimori regime, Peru has tried to fight corruption while sustaining economic growth. In spite of human rights progress since the time of insurgency, many problems are still visible and show the continued marginalization of those who suffered through the violence of the Peruvian conflict. A caretaker government presided over by Valentin Paniagua took on the responsibility of conducting new presidential and congressional elections. Afterwards, Alejandro Toledo became president in 2001. On the 28th of July 2006, former President Alan Garcia became president of Peru after winning the 2006 elections. In May 2008, Peru became a member of the Union of South American Nations. On 5 June 2011, Ollanta Humala was elected president.